Welcome to Congregation L'Dor Va-Dor's brand new session with Dr. Richard Schwartz and Rabbi Barry Silver. And the title of this session is, Does Judaism Lead to Being a Vegan or at least a Vegetarian? And we have Dr. Schwartz all the way from Israel joining us for this broadcast. And I'd like to have Rabbi Barry introduce Dr. Schwartz. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sharon, for making this possible. It's always great the way you run all of our programs and make so much interesting material available to people, this time throughout the world. And it's a great pleasure to have Dr. Richard Schwartz with us here today. He's a real hero of mine and a hero to many. He's also a hero to many animals who are unaware of his activities, but who benefit greatly from what he does. He actually practices what most rabbis merely preach. He practices kindness, he spreads compassion, he shares wisdom, and it's an honor to have him with us here with Congregation L'Dor Va-Dor and also with the world in cyberspace. He also is quite unique in this way. Many people are in cyberspace and have websites and communicate because they want to raise money. Dr. Schwartz is not interested in raising money, although he doesn't mind if people want to support what he's doing financially. He's far more interested in raising issues, raising consciousness, and raising the ethical level of behavior of Jews and all people, and of saving our planet. And so it's a great pleasure, a thrill, a privilege to have Dr. Richard Schwartz with us here today. I'm going to turn it over to him. He's going to do about 20 minutes of PowerPoints and some of his best propaganda that he has as far as animal rights and being a vegan, or as he says, at least a vegetarian. I hope the vegetarians like me won't feel slighted or insulted by saying at least a vegetarian, but it's really great to have him, and we're going to have a very robust discussion afterwards, so I hope you'll stick around for that as well. Dr. Schwartz, take it away.
Okay, many thanks, Rabbi, and want to commend you as well, because you've been also doing so much. Wish you much continued success, because we know this is the greatest cause of getting people to be vegans, for a healthier world, a better world for everybody. So again, the topic was indicated, should Jews basically be vegans or at least vegetarians? And, oh no, it's not. Let me see, I have to maybe share the screen again. Oh, maybe it's going to be working now. Okay, so seems okay. Just a very little about me. I'm Professor Emeritus of Math at the College of Staten Island, and I'm President Emeritus of Jewish Veg. Formerly that was known as Jewish Vegetarians of North America. And just to give you an idea, what's from Judaism and Vegetarian, that's the third edition. By the way, that first edition was 1982. So you can see I've been really involved for over 40 years, and what I'm presenting tonight is based on some of that. And my more recent book, you can see vegetarianism now shifting more to veganism, and we'll give some reasons for that. And subtitle, Saving Our World, so critical, revitalizing Judaism. And the issues are so critical, I am offering free a complimentary PDF of this book to anybody that emails me, and I'll give the email address at the end of this program. And I've been involved in getting the message out. And here's tonight's topic. That was a cover story in Jewish Report a year or two ago, and nobody really has been able to answer our very powerful arguments. And most of my analysis will be based on science, but just a little idea. Right from the very beginning, in Gan Eden, God's first dietary regimen, strictly vegan, talked about the herbs of the field, the fruits of the trees, and the other ideal time to come that Jews yearn for, the Messianic period, that also is pictured to be a vegan period based on the powerful prophecy of Isaiah, that in that ideal time, the wolf will dwell with the lamb, the lion that you see here will eat straw like the ox, no one shall hurt nor destroy in all of God's holy mountain. Okay, so here it is, the main reasons for veganism, and they're all consistent with basic Jewish values, and those of other religions as well. So preserving our health, treating animals with compassion, protecting the environment, conserving natural resources, reducing hunger, and pursuing peace. And in the rest of the program, I'm going to basically briefly give Jewish teachings and show how the realities with factory farming and animal-based diets are very far from these basic teachings. So teachings on health in the book of Deuteronomy that we'll soon be reading, V'nishmatem mi'ol v'nafshotehem, diligently guard your health. Notice the word ma'od here, very much 613 mitzvot, but this is one that says be very diligent. Very important concept of pikuach nefesh, Jewish mandate. We've got to do everything possible to save a human life. 613 mitzvot and 610 can be overridden if it's needed to save a life. Okay, this one is a little hard to see, but I don't think I can explain it. Here it is: the more meat in the diet, the more heart disease and the more bowel cancer. And I know it's hard for you to read, but that's why I'm giving you a little explanation. Here's another case: very little meat, far less heart disease with a difference, and far less bowel cancer. That's the reality, that we could save so many lives and make other lives more energetic on the vegan diet. And here, very quickly, the reason we are much closer to herbivorous animals. Look at the difference in these teeth, and we're lying even as an omnivorous bear. And I think you can see a slight difference here. This hand and claws of an animal, and our digestive system is 4 times longer. Here you have a vegetarian animal here, carnivorous, than a carnivorous or omnivorous animal. So you can see we are very different, and that's really the big problem, because most people in the world have an omnivorous diet, even though based again on Genesis 1:29, the Garden of Eden, and all the science. Okay, so one other thing before we leave the health issue, we know we've all suffered greatly recently from that corona pandemic, and very likely it started in a wet market like this, and many other pandemics caused by animal agriculture. By the way, this presentation is like even less than half of my usual 50-minute or so presentation. So leaving out certain things, but I want to hit the highlights, I think, and then based on, I'm sure it'll be a very interesting discussion, and Rabbi Silver will go to other things. Wait a minute. Okay, now we're going to second teaching. You know, and we have the song to say the Dayenu, even if there's nothing else, even if it was only health, that would be enough. But strong teachings on compassion. Jews are to be Rahmanim b'nei Rahmanim, compassionate children of compassionate ancestors, emulating a God whose compassion is over all God's works. That's in the Psalms. Ashrei, cited 3 times every day in the synagogue, and the book of Proverbs as well. The righteous person considers the lives of his or her animals. Okay, and again, powerful Jewish teaching, the realities in the world far from it. Egg-laying hens, look at how this small space, they can't even raise a wing. All the natural instincts thwarted, so they tend to peck at each other. And instead of giving more space, look at this cruel process. They are debeaked, no painkiller, no anesthetic, very, very harmful to the birds. But you might say the males may suffer even more. These are the male chicks, can't lay eggs, haven't been genetically programmed to have much flesh. So they are killed. Oh, I think, I'm sorry, this is the, he had to put in maybe ground up, or sometimes they put in a plastic bag to suffocate. And here's dairy cows artificially impregnated, inseminated every single year, so keep milk. And even the industry calls it rape racks. And then the calves taken away. So again, very much against the Jewish teaching of Tzar B'Alikayim, the prohibition against causing pain to animals, because the issues are so strong. Last summer, I had an ebook, Restoring and Transforming the Ancient Jewish New Year for Animals, an idea whose time has come. Initially for sacrifice, we want to transform it into a day devoted to increasing awareness of Jewish teachings, impressions for animals, and how far the realities are from that. Okay, environmental, and the most important reasons to be a vegan. It says in chapter 2, human being put into Gan Eden, Garden of Eden, to work the land, but also to guard it. We're to be Shomrei Hadamah, guardians of the earth. And here's something very much misrepresented, that we're given dominion, certainly not a blank check. The rabbis, the sages, that means responsible stewardship or guardianship. We're to be co-workers again with God, protecting the earth. Many negative environmental effects of animal-based agriculture, deforestation, soil erosion, water pollution, loss of species, and we'll see an example of that later. Most important, climate change, so we're going to focus on that. And this is very important. You know, there's so many deniers out there, unfortunately, but the scientific consensus is super strong. 97% of climate experts, all the major science academies worldwide that have taken a position, and most important, thousands of peer-reviewed articles in respected science journals. Okay, so this is one of 3 super important graphs. This horizontal line is the average temperature for the 20th century. You know, below it, okay? And notice higher and higher temperatures. The last 8 years are the warmest, hottest 8 years in recorded history. And they expect the next 5 to be even hotter with El Nino effects. And here is a very significant graph. The temperature projected to get much hotter. We are at about 1.2 degrees Celsius, somewhere around 2024. The experts hope not to pass 1.5 degrees Celsius, because beyond that should be very negative climate effects. But notice we could hit that within the 2030s, and even 2 degrees Celsius. But notice, and I have a lot of graphs on that I'm not showing, the heat waves, the floods, the droughts, and wildfires, even at 1.2. So imagine how bad it'll be projected by the end of the century, even minimally 3 degrees, and it could be 4, 5, or 6. So this is the greatest threat to humanity, and everything possible has to be done on it. What's super important for people to be vegans, glaciers are melting, the polar ice caps. Here's an example, Greenland melting, and if that continues melting, sea rises could be very high. There's already sunny day flooding from high tides in coastal cities like Miami, not far from where Rabbi is, and polar bears in danger of extinction, many other animals as well because of the heat waves and other conditions like that. And another important thing is the military experts think there's going to be tens of millions, maybe more than 100 million desperate refugees fleeing from the heat waves and other climate effect. It makes instability, terrorism, and war far more likely. Already it's happened in Sudan, for example. Now here is a super, super important graph. This is atmospheric carbon dioxide. And it was only 285 way back here at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. The experts think that 350 roughly here is like a threshold. Beyond that, we're really in danger. So it's gone way up, 420, and it's increasing by 2 or 3 parts per million per year. Unless we find a way to drop that down, we are in for more and more very significant climate events. And we'll see a way of doing that in a while. Now, how do we respond? The experts say solar energy, yeah, we got to move away from fossil fuels. That certainly is part of the answer. Wind power, and prices have gone down, so it's very good. But they are ignoring, we all know about the elephant in the room, but now we're ignoring the cow in the room. Because, and this is from a system engineer who's really done a lot, animal action, the leading cause of climate change. 2 reasons for that. One, the cows and the other ruminants emit methane, which is a very potent greenhouse gas, only in the atmosphere 10 or 15 years, but over 80 times as potent per unit weight as carbon dioxide. But more important than that, let's see. Oh, just to indicate carbon dioxide is still increasing, even as we show the high values from before. So here is the reality. You notice of all the land, 3/4 about is for animal agriculture, only about 1/4 for plant. The incredible thing, there used to be 6 trillion trees in the world, now it's down to about 3 trillion, and over 40% of the ice-free land is now used for grazing of animals and growing feed crops for animals. So that has to be turned around, and that can only be done with a great increase in vegan diets. So we can reforest much of the area, and that's shown over here. If we can reforest it, these additional trees will sequester much of that very high atmospheric carbon dioxide, bring it down below maybe 350, the safety threshold value. Okay, so now, mentioned before, there were 6 issues. Spend a little bit of time on health, animals, the environment. Very briefly on the following 3, there's conservation of resources. Very powerful teaching in Baal Tashkit based on Deuteronomy chapter 20. And it indicates there that even in wartime, you cannot destroy fruit-bearing trees to try to overcome an enemy fortification through the battering ram, for example. But the sages extended that into a general principle of Baal Tashkit, not to waste or destroy anything of value. And Rabbi Samson Raphael Hertz said that also means not using any things more than is necessary. But here is just one example. Tremendous irrigation to grow the feed crops for the animals, such that it takes as much as 13 times as much water on an animal-based diet than on a vegan diet. And it's also very wasteful of energy and of land, etc. Again, just hitting some of the highlights. Judaism has very powerful teachings on hunger, on Yom Kippur. People are fasting, thinking, gee, look what I'm doing, but not enough. Isaiah says, true purpose of fasting, work to end depression, share your bread with the hungry. And the Torah, of course, said, leave the corners of your field, gleanings of your harvest for the poor and the hungry. But here again, there's a scandal of world hunger because with an estimated 9 million people dying of hunger every year, and about less than 10% chronically malnourished, 70% of the grain in the U.S. fed to animals destined for slaughter. What makes it even more shameful is that we take very healthy foods like corn and soy and oats, high in fiber and complex carbohydrates, feed them to, and also devoid of fiber, high in fiber and complex carbohydrates, devoid of cholesterol, and devoid of cholesterol and saturated fat. Feed them to animals to get just the opposite product or characteristics. Okay, Jewish teachings on peace. In the book of Psalms, seek peace, notice pursue it. Very important. Only one other thing in Judaism, tzedek to pursue justice. And the words of Isaiah, Jews have gone to war, but the prophetic dream blew their swords into plowshares, spears into pruning hooks. And however, when there's a hunger, when there's shortages, it's more likely to lead to conflicts. Matter of fact, the sages in the Torah, the Hebrew word lechem for bread, milchama for war, they come from the same root. The sages deduce from that that when there's a shortage of grain and other resources, people are more likely to go to war. So I have an idea. The slogans of the peace movement and the vegetarian and vegan movements can be one and the same. All we're saying, and here it is from John Lennon, give peace a chance. And we need peace on earth, and here's the whole world with peace. And what a better world it would be if people based their diets on that rather than a high meat consumption. And by the way, it's much easier today to be a vegan because there's such an abundance now of plant-based substitutes. They have the texture, appearance, and taste so close to meat and other animal products that even long-time meat eaters can't tell the difference. Okay, so much, much, much more, and I hope the discussion, I'm looking forward to with the Rabbi, bring it out. But here's the bottom line. What kind of world are we leaving for future generations? I've been blessed, been almost 7 years, 4 grandchildren, we're getting married, 6 great-grandchildren, 1 more on the way. What kind of world are we leaving them? So that is why it is super urgent there be a vegan world so that there can be a healthier, habitable, more sustainable world for future generations. And finally, I want to thank people for watching. Hope you found it meaningful, valuable. Whoops. Okay, set my timer. So it's just going to be exactly almost 20 minutes. We're finishing. But I look forward to any comments that people have, questions. Feel free to contact me at veggierich@gmail.com. And as I said before, if you would like to get complimentary copy of my book, Vegan Revolution, Saving Our World, Revitalizing Judaism, be very happy to send it to you. I want to get it out to as many people as possible. And I can send some additional books. I have a 20th edition being published, God willing, this summer of Judaism and Global Survival. So forward to that. I'm going to stop my screen sharing and look forward to the discussion with Rabbi. Let's see.
Dr. Schwartz, thank you very much for that great presentation. I know it's difficult because it's the first time that you had to circumcise your slide presentation and do it within 20 minutes, and you did it very well. It's a very compelling, powerful presentation you made with wonderful information and reference to Jewish ideals and values. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. I just want everyone else to know, in case you couldn't tell, Dr. Schwartz is beyond the age where many people retire. He is doing this out of the kindness of his heart. He demonstrates passion and compassion combined together. They're a very powerful force. And he is filled with idealism and the desire to improve this world and save us from catastrophe. So I want to compliment you and commend you on what you're doing. He's involved with a group called Jewish Veg, which also is a wonderful organization spreading the word, spreading the gospel about becoming a vegan. And it is interesting that your first book was about Judaism, vegetarianism, and now you've shifted to focusing not just on vegetarianism, but on veganism and trying to remove all animal products from the diet because of the harmful effect that it has. I would like to ask you a question, and you can feel free to expound on this thought. You make a very good case for why being a vegan is consistent with Judaism, but it's also true that very, very few Jews are vegan. We do have a higher percentage perhaps than other groups, and it is growing, but the number of Jews who are vegan, I don't know what it is, I haven't studied it, but probably 2, 3, maybe 5%, but a very, very small minority. Can you comment on why that is? If being a vegan is so consistent with Jewish values, why is it that the vast majority of Jews are not vegan?
Well, okay, first I want to thank you very much for your very kind words. And by the way, Israel is considered a vegan capital of the world. It's probably is the highest percent of vegans. Well, there's a saying you may have heard, denial is not just a river in Egypt. People are in denial that, the parents hate meat, the grandparents, it's part of the life, and people don't want to change. By the way, it's so easy, as I said before, to change because there's so many substitutes. And by the way, you beat me to it. I was going to ask you, why is it that so many rabbis are not? Because they are so well versed in Jewish values. So there might be, I once said to somebody, there are 2 big problems. one is ignorance and one is apathy. And the answer I got was, I don't know and I don't care. So there's a lot of denial out there, and then we have the info, and it's just incredible that you're asking a $1 million question. We have to find out more about it. But the good news is that there has been a shift in our direction, especially among the young people, so that things are changing. And even though many are not vegan, many may have moved at least to a partial vegan kind of diet. So do you have any theory why so few rabbis are vegan, since they are so committed to getting people to be Jewishly observant as much as possible? They want people to do the mitzvot. And the fact that animal-based diets and agriculture violate the 6 very fundamental teachings. It's super important to take care of our health and treat animals with compassion, protect the environment, etc. Any thoughts on why more rabbis aren't? And by the way, you mentioned, thankfully, Jewish Veg, and they are going to be coming out, I think, before Rosh Hashanah with a strong vegan statement, and that has been signed by about 200 rabbis. So we're gaining momentum, we're moving in the right direction, but much more has to be done.
Well, to respond to your question, since you answered mine, I don't know if you're aware of this. Do you know why a Jew answers a question with a question? Why not? So anyway, the answer, I believe, is that many Jewish people, including rabbis, are more interested in the ritual than the spiritual. They're more interested in the going through the motions than going through the emotions. And very few Jewish people really practice the height of ethical ideals that you're speaking about, Dr. Schwartz. I think, and certain things are easier to do than others. It is easier to show up in a synagogue than to change your diet. Changing your diet is difficult. I will take issue with slightly with something that you're saying. It is true that today it's a lot easier to be a vegetarian and to some extent a vegan than it was 40 years ago. I stopped eating meat about 50 years ago. And back then you would be hard pressed to find vegetarian options in restaurants. You just have to get a baked potato or maybe some veggies or something like that, but they didn't have things catering to vegetarians. Today it is easier, but I wouldn't say that you can get everything that you would want in a regular diet and a vegan diet, and the taste is almost indistinguishable. Some of the things are pretty good. Some of the things are pretty close. Some of the things, the alternatives aren't so good yet, and they're working on it. To become a vegan takes, in my opinion, a vast, huge commitment to the welfare of animals and the welfare of the planet. It takes a major decision in your life that you're going to undergo some changes that are not going to be that simple, but the goal and the ideals are well worth it. I don't think our religion is meeting the challenge of motivating people to make that type of a commitment. And so a lot of people aren't joining synagogues anymore at all. Many people I know are saying, well, I'm culturally Jewish, but I'm not religious. And what that means to me is that the Jewish religion is doing a horrible job of explaining to people why it's so important that we practice Judaism. When they say they're not religious, they're cultural, what they're saying is the religion turns me off. I don't get anything out of the religion. I like being part of a Jewish culture, a Jewish philosophy. I'll throw in some Yiddish terms sometimes. I'll wear my Jewish star. I'll show up at the high holidays, maybe, perhaps even on a Friday night once in a while, but the Jewish religion turns me off. And so I think that this is a symptom of the fact that we're doing a horrible job of presenting what I think is an incredible heritage that non-Jews have praised to the skies and said that Jewish people and Judaism is responsible for making this world a much better place. We're the conscience of the world, but our own people generally don't see fit to practice Judaism. If they did,
Mhm.
and they took it seriously, they would certainly respond to your message because it is very powerful. And as you say, you can certainly today get by on a vegetarian diet and a vegan diet. Yes, it takes a commitment and there's some changes, but you could certainly do it and you'd be much healthier for it. Dr.
Absolutely.
Schwartz, do you want to comment on that? Anything I say
Yeah,
that you
yeah.
disagree with or agree
No,
with?
no, no, no. Unfortunately, well, to give an example, one of my books is called Who Stole My Religion? And it's sort of related to what you've been saying, more the rituals than the spiritual. And it's why one of my favorite rabbis, Abraham Joshua Heschel, is very religious, but also he was involved against the Vietnam War and speaking out for Soviet Jewry, and of course marching with Martin Luther King. So in that book, Who Stole My Religion, I argue that Judaism is a radical religion in the best sense of the term. Think of the powerful teaching on justice, on peace, two things we're told to pursue. 36 times it indicates be kind to the stranger. And so many more powerful teachings. And one thing I heard, I don't know if you introduce a little politics, and that most Jews are really progressives, but when it comes to Donald Trump, 76% of the Orthodox backing him and only 13% against it. So I agree with you on it. But one thing about, I might take a little issue with the difficulty of becoming a vegan. Was true, habits are hard to break, but there's so many fruits and vegetables, and especially here in Israel. And people go, sometimes they have friends that say, I went to this vegan restaurant and the food was unbelievable. But when they've tried it, they really have found it great. And there's so many more restaurants now, books. You go online and get all kinds of recipes. So it's much easier to be a vegan. And I mentioned the alternates to meat, plant-based alternates, but that can be maybe as a trial kind of thing. But even without that, many powerful food. Now, one other thing I mentioned as part of the slide presentation, we need new dynamic ideas, and one of them is reinstating and transforming that ancient Jewish New Year for animals. As you know, Tu B'Shvat changed, which sort of died out, and this temple was destroyed in 70 in the Common Era. Thankfully, no more sacrifices. And the Kabbalists restored that. Now, Tu B'Shvat has become like a Jewish environmental day. So that's why I say the same thing. We need a day. Judaism has so many teachings on compassion for animals. And somehow we have to get the word to Rabbi. For example, if I was talking to Rabbi and said, look, how can we justify drinking milk from a cow? First of all, almond milk, rice milk, soy milk, coconut milk, so many substitutes. When that cow is artificially impregnated every single year, and imagine taking the babies away after maybe one day of nursing, and also the life of that cow, maybe only 5 years because of the treatment that the cow receives, where it could be as much as 20 years if the cow was led to lead more of a natural life. The same with the egg industry. How can we anybody Jew justify these things? And then I made a commitment to really try to get the word out. So I really appreciate this opportunity. And I'm going to try to get on many more podcast radio programs and all. So I'm wondering, do you have any ideas for more? You're right, and you said, why is so few Jews, vegetarians, and vegans? So I have these few ideas. Do you have any ideas for how do we break through the ignorance, apathy, and other kinds of resistance?
Well, you're doing a tremendous job in doing that. We need more people like you, more people who are willing to tell the truth. You see, a lot of times rabbis don't want to say things that are going to make their congregants uncomfortable. But I agree with you. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel is one of my heroes too. And he said that the purpose of religion is to nudge us out of our comfort zone. Most rabbis don't want to do that because people will get upset. They might quit, they might leave, they might get angry. What most people want to hear is for the rabbi to just confirm what they're doing and not move them in a different direction. So if a rabbi were to say you should stop eating meat, people are going to maybe get upset. Like, I don't want to stop eating meat. I know I've faced quite a bit of backlash myself.
Imagine.
If you tell Jewish people things that the rabbi believes to be true, but they don't want to hear, they'll get upset. So most rabbis don't want to rock the boat. And you're right. That's the exact opposite of what Judaism is all about. It should be a radical religion. Radical literally means going back to the roots. It's related to the word radish, which is a root, or radiate, which means to come out from the center. So a radical person in Judaism is just someone who goes back to the roots, the foundations of Judaism, which you find, as you say, in Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, when we started out with a close kinship to the animal world, and we were together with them rather than lording over them and consuming them. So it's difficult for rabbis who want to keep their job and who want to build up their membership to tell people things they don't want to hear. But a good leader will do that. And I think we're lacking, sadly, in that type of leadership. I did want to ask you about something that you mentioned. You mentioned that a majority of Orthodox Jews are pro-Trump. And of course, if you're engaged in that mentality, I don't know what the statistics are, but I would say that of the Trump followers, probably 1% or 0.5% or 0.01% are vegans. I mean, his kids came back from Africa with 2 dead animals, and like bragging about how macho they were for killing these animals. Why do you think it is that so many of the Orthodox are enamored with Trump and this kind of a bullyish, tough guy mentality? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah. Okay. For that, I just want to comment on one thing. As you say, it's difficult for a rabbi to tell people to stop eating meat. But I wonder, instead of that, if they would just open it up for discussion and say, what are the issues and why and how? And Judaism certainly doesn't command people to be vegetarians or vegans. And what are the realities? Can we have try a vegan meal? Can we have a debate, discussion, et cetera, et cetera? And okay, so what was your question again?
Why are so many of the Orthodox pro-Trump, do you think?
Okay, well, I think it may go back to their thoughts about Israel, perhaps. They think he was wonderful for Israel, did do some good things, but he did 2 terrible things, in my humble opinion. One is that he was in denial about climate change. He appointed all kinds of environmental people who are in denial, and they did everything possible to turn back legislation, weaken it, that meant to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And and there was just an article in the Jerusalem Post that less than 50% of Republicans feel that really doing a lot for the environment is important. They give it a low priority. And one other thing that we're now seeing a lot of, that with Netanyahu's real strong support, Trump pulled out of that nuclear deal that most nuclear experts think was working. And without a plan B, and now, unfortunately, Iran is much closer to getting a nuclear weapon and also in a much better bargaining position. So those are some possibilities. And this is, to me, a tragedy in Jewish education. I mean, the fact that those who have spent the most time are most knowledgeable about the Torah, have been to yeshivas and learning into the Gemara, and something is very wrong. That I've often thought that there's been a tension in Judaism between the priestly and the prophetic, and often the priestly seems to be winning out. That people, just to give you one example, as you know, before Pesach, the amount of time that women spend on cleaning the house and getting rid of very commendable, but then they sit down to a meal that violates at least 6 Jewish mandates about the health.
Well, Dr. Schwartz, it's no mystery to me why Orthodox Jews would be strong followers of Trump, just like his other power base is fundamentalist Christians. It's very obvious. Fundamentalist Christians and Orthodox Jews are both taught, and you say, why is it that they have all this education and they still would deny climate change, because what they're taught in the yeshivas is to deny science. They're not educated in science. They're not educated in environmental issues or concerns. They have none. They're taught to deny science. They're taught to believe based on blind faith. And so they're ripe for the picking when a charlatan like Trump comes along and says, believe me, or trust me, or I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and my followers will still be with me. Their minds are already trained to accept that type of irrational thinking, and not to believe on evidence, but to believe on blind faith. And that's a very, very dangerous situation. And so they deny climate change. To have someone walk out of a yeshiva denying climate change, they would be better off if they never had one day of Jewish education, if that's what it does. If they walk out of there thinking that Donald Trump is their guy, then their education is not doing them any good. It's doing them a great deal of harm. What we need to do is to have rational Judaism, science-based Judaism, the type that you're practicing. That book that you wrote, Who Stole My Religion, is pure genius. I wish everyone would read that book, if nothing else. It's an incredible book in indicating what are Jewish ideals and what it really means to lead a Jewish life. Going to the synagogue, that's a good thing. Listening to the rabbis, celebrating the holidays, knowing Hebrew, that's a good thing. But the essence of it, what you really want to get out of Judaism, is working towards making this world better, being part of a group that for thousands of years has a divine mission, a calling. That's what it means to be Jewish. That's the most important part. The other things should just lead to that paramount goal, the holidays and the rituals and the prayers and the Hebrew and the songs. Those things should all lead us to the main goal of making the world better and protecting our planet. Unfortunately, for many people, those outer trappings are an end in itself. And so they completely ignore the spiritual in place of the ritual. Mm-hmm. So I really, that's why I wanted to have you here, Dr. Schwartz, because I agree with what you're saying. You're suggesting that maybe rabbis don't have to tell people, okay, you all have to be vegan or vegetarian or whatever. Maybe if they just allow someone like you to introduce the topic and to discuss it, that would be a great thing. We could say Dayenu. Maybe that would be enough. And so that's why we have you here. And that's why at L'Dor Va-Dor, we frequently have programs about diet and animals and vegetarianism, veganism. And I hope that a lot of people will watch this discussion, this podcast. I know we'll do everything we can to circulate it far and wide. And really, I have to tell you again, my yarmulke is off to you. You're doing incredible work. You're extremely idealistic. You're doing it well beyond the years that most rabbis would just stop doing their thing. A lot of rabbis retire at 65 or 70. You will never retire. You are always going to keep going as long as you have breath in you. Because what you say you believe from your heart, many rabbis, they're just telling what the people want to hear. They're just doing their job. What you do comes straight from the heart, and it's well received by millions of people throughout the world.
Well, thank you. And again, commend you for all you're doing. But I want to get back to what's really the bottom line, that we are heading toward an incredible climate catastrophe. And you see it all the time. And by the way, here in Israel, they are projecting that this summer, there might be at least 3 times where for 2 or 3 days, it could be as high as 120 degrees Fahrenheit. That won't be for the whole country, but maybe in as high as 110. And it's happening already in many other countries. The Mediterranean is projected to rise by over 3 feet by mid-century and maybe over 8 feet by the end of the century. And most of Israel's population and infrastructure is in that coastal Mediterranean plain. So this is the bottom line. Again, I've been blessed with 6 grandchildren I mentioned, and what kind of world are we going to leave them? So it's essential. It's a long shot when the resistance we've been talking about still out there. But unless people change the diet, and it's amazing that even with people like Al Gore and Bill McKibben, people who are super into climate change, they are overlooking the cow in the room. They keep talking about zero emissions, very important, but they're forgetting the emissions from the cows, animal agriculture in general. It's really madness and sheer insanity, where we can get all the nutrients we need on plant-based diets and save on water, save on energy. And
well, Dr. Schwartz, like Gore and these others, they don't want to try to move people out of their comfort zone either, because they will lose popularity. So they're not telling the truth on this issue. Either they don't know, or they know and they don't say it. That's why I appreciate what you're doing. The situation is catastrophic, and we are downplaying it, and an entire political party in the United States is in denial. And Pharaoh was in denial, literally, as you say, denial, but he also is in denial about climate change. That was the original denial. When the Nile River turned red, he was in denial about what was the true cause of it. And now come hellish fires, or the high waters of ocean rising. Our people are in denial, and our politicians are playing a fiddle. They're fiddling while the planet burns. And it's a very scary situation. We need a real revolution and a real radical change in what we're doing, as you're suggesting. In the United States, we're seeing the devastation of forest fires in Canada that are coming down here, and the smoke is harming the people of this country. And in Israel, yes, with water being so scarce, they're facing horrible problems because of climate change. But I wanted to ask you something else, Dr. Schwartz. We had a discussion with a representative from Jewish Veg, an Orthodox rabbi, and the question was asked of him: why do you say that Judaism is consistent with concern for animals, when in the Torah we see commandments that are so many commandments about animal sacrifice, and that you should eat meat and fish on the Sabbath? How do you reconcile your contention that to be Jewish and consistent with Jewish ideals as a vegetarian diet and concern for animals, when there's so many commandments dealing with sacrificing animals? How do you reconcile that?
Yeah, okay. Well, according to the Rambam Maimonides, he indicated that this was a concession to the times where that was the common mode of worship. They just didn't know any other at that time, and it was felt that if they didn't have sacrifices, people may have rejected that in all of Judaism. But again, within Judaism, it was a step forward, because at that time there was child sacrifice, human sacrifice, and many other pagan practices. And also the idea was to keep it in one central location. A person couldn't just go off and do sacrifice anyway. And the idea was to hopefully wean people off of the idolatrous practices. And as you well know, the Jewish prophets spoke out very strongly against sacrifices, especially if done along with evil acts and injustices. And that was part of the problem. A person shouldn't think, I made a sacrifice, now I'm okay, unless they change in other ways. And according to the Rav Kook, first chief rabbi of Priesthood Israel, he indicates that hopefully in the third temple, or the Messianic period, the ideal time that Jews yearn for, that there won't be any animal sacrifices. There's a midrash that says people will be at a higher madrega, a higher level, and there won't be a need for sin offerings or animal offerings. But Thanksgiving offerings are always in good need and all, and they can be done with grains. So we're moving away from that. Again, that's what I was mentioning before, the tension between the priestly and the prophetic. And the priests are very happy with sacrifices, and that's keeps them going. That's what they do. But again, the prophet spoke out against it, and unfortunately today we don't have it. And there's a rabbi here in Israel, very well-known, Nathan Lopez Cardozo, and he says, "Wouldn't Judaism be better off without sacrifice? Why do we need it at this time?" And That's another reason that I mentioned before. I'm pushing for the idea of revitalizing the Jewish New Year for animals and showing the compassionate side, because unfortunately there's all too much in the door, in the prayers, especially in the holidays, about what animals can you eat, which animals are kosher. And even there, by the way, that's considered a concession that, again, God's first dietary regimen was strictly vegan. And according to Rav Kook and others, the Messianic period that should come, hopefully, soon will also be vegan.
Well, Dr. Schwartz, let me share with you a perspective from our synagogue. Right, so we practice something called cosmic Judaism. It unites Judaism and science. It relies on the teachings of Einstein, Spinoza, the great scientists and great Jewish prophets and Jewish ideals. And we try to synthesize the two. So we did have the Orthodox rabbi with us, and he was asked the same question. And he actually said, like many Orthodox rabbis do, that he looks forward to the time when the temple will be rebuilt, and they will revive animal sacrifice. He thought that was a great thing, and many Orthodox rabbis do. You're right. There are some who say that it won't happen, but according to the traditional Judaism, absolutely they'll revive it. And the comment by Maimonides, first of all, it makes God look rather silly. I mean, to suggest that he would order Jewish people to sacrifice animals, even though he didn't want it, just to appease them, seems kind of silly. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that God ordered Jewish people to do that would go against their grain, like circumcising people wouldn't be something that they might go along with or want to, but he didn't have any problem doing that. Stoning people for trivial offenses like speaking out against God or homosexuality or not being a virgin if you're a woman upon marriage, he didn't seem to have any problem about that. But telling people not to sacrifice animals to him, supposedly, oh, he couldn't do that because the people would get upset. I don't think they would have minded at all if he did that. But I agree with you as far as the prophets are concerned. The prophets moved away from that. The prophets had God saying, I don't want your sacrifices. I just want you to have a good heart, to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. The prophets moved on beyond it. But there are people today among the Orthodox who want to go back, even ignoring the advances of the prophets,
very few,
because of a belief, an irrational belief that God wrote the Torah. And therefore, if God wrote the Torah, we need to follow it. Now, also, if Maimonides was correct, and say, well, God didn't really want to do this, he was just humoring us, why would it say in the Torah that he enjoys the aroma of charred animal flesh? The excuse doesn't make sense. The people who wrote the Bible literally believed that God, like the gods of all primitive mythologies at that time, they believed that gods wanted to be fed by human beings. Because they were non-corporeal, the way that you feed them is to burn up an animal and they would ingest the smoke. They would ingest that because they didn't have a body. And so we should chalk this up to primitive thinking that we've outgrown and give up the irrational notion that God wrote the Torah and that God actually wants us to have animal sacrifices. Go ahead, Dr. Schwartz. I know you want to jump in.
Oh, right. For the point I was making. Well, as you know, God has given us free will. God could have made us all like angels and then no problem. And well, that's free will. And he's hoping, you mentioned, you agreeing with me about Rabbi Heschel. One of his books, as you know, is God is in Search of Man. God is seeking the righteous individuals and given with the Torah. And as you know, also, you can look at it when we lift up the Torah, it says, this is the Torah that God gave, but through Moshe Rabbeinu, perhaps Moshe, with the brother Aaron being the chief priest and all, he wanted to indicate that was God's feeling. And again, there are things, that we wish weren't there. Again, there's very distinguished rabbi here, Judaism far better off without the sacrifices. But so the thing is, we have to accentuate the positive, that there are so many other powerful teachings. It says, every single day in these prayers in the synagogue, Baruch Merachem al Haaretz, Baruch Merachem al Habriot, that God's compassions over the earth and all the creatures. There's difficulty, we're saying, but and thank God, don't have the sacrifices today. And I just feel we have to accentuate the positive thing, and tying it in with veganism. There's arguments all over, but the bottom line is that we have a choice in our diets. So I've been arguing, when you have a choice, shouldn't that choice take into account the highest of Jewish values, the teachings about health and compassion and protecting the environment, and work with that? And sometimes I give an example, we're recording this July 5th, right after July 4th. When you think of U.S. history and the massacre of the Indians, the enslavement of blacks, not giving women the right to vote, backing dictators and all, a lot of things very negative. But on the other hand, thank God, having democracy, having people with the right to speak and protest and all that. So we have to build on the positive, even though, like in the Torah, I wish the sacrifices weren't there. And by the way, I feel that actually there's an insensitivity that's involved when you constantly read about animals being killed and slaughtered, and not feel that there's something we should get away with. That is very negative. Again, where I'm trying to restore that ancient Jewish New Year for animals, so that we focus on the positive. And we have to focus on the positive to get people to realize that the way that animals are treated today, unbelievable, so far from the Jewish teaching, Tzar B'Rakayim, the prohibition about mistreating animals. So we don't have all the answers, but we know that we face the greatest threat to humanity, and we have to use the positive Jewish values to make a difference.
Dr. Schwartz, I think we do have the answers.
Well,
the answer very clearly is to liberate ourselves from the irrational notion that God wrote the Torah. Because as great as you are as a teacher, and as great as you are as someone who can explain the positive side, as you say, of the Bible, as long as people think God wrote the Torah, which is completely irrational, they're going to think irrationally, and they're going to be reading, like you say, over and over and over and over again, endless commandments and stories about animals being sacrificed in grisly, gruesome, grotesque ways. And they're going to conclude that God must enjoy slaughtering animals. He loves blood. He likes the aroma. You can't get away from it. There's only one way that you're going to get anywhere. And there's only one way that Judaism will actually be a force for animal welfare. And that is to liberate ourselves once and for all from the irrational notion that God wrote the Torah. He did not. There's no being who wrote that. That was created, obviously, by human beings. And until we are able to liberate ourselves from that, you mentioned the terrible things that were done in the United States: slavery, genocide, oppression of women. All of them were done not in spite of the Bible, because of it. The people who did these things read in the Bible that the Jews were ordered by God to slaughter the Canaanites, the Jebusites, the Midianites. And so they said, well, we're here in our promised land. I guess we should slaughter these people too. That's what God wants. They read in the Bible that Ham, the descendant of African Americans, was told that you will be a slave to your brothers. And so they said, this is in the Bible, slavery. They read in the Bible that women should be subservient to men. And so they were denied the right to vote. As long as people believe that the Bible was written by God, it's going to continue to be a retrograde source of cruelty and barbarism. You're right. The Bible, the Torah, has beautiful comments in it, incredibly exalted statements. That's why we revere the Torah. But if you accept that all of it is divine intelligence, you will always, and the Jewish people will always, be taking us back in the wrong direction towards primitive barbarism, killing, animal sacrifice, oppression of people, genocide. We've got to liberate ourselves. I understand you might not take that position, but this is the position of Congregation L'Dor Va-Dor. It's also the position of many other Jews, Reconstructionist Jews, humanistic Jews, and to a large extent, Reform Jews, who want us to move away from the concept that God gave the Torah to Moses. He didn't. In the old days, if you wanted people to believe and to follow and to obey, you couldn't say Joe Schmo wrote this book, here, do what it says. You had to say God wrote it. We shouldn't be trying to fool people anymore, and we should tell people the truth. And then we have a chance of having the entire Jewish people joining in with this force and being a really great source for good and for liberating ourselves from oppression of animals.
Yeah. Okay. Well, again, people pick and choose, and again, they overlook the very, very positive things in the Torah. In terms, it says pursue peace. That is, it's one of the two things: pursue peace, pursue justice. Again, it said Judaism is a radical religion. There were parts that which weren't there, but they've been changed by the prophets, by the Nevi'im. And a strong case can be made for veganism in the Torah, and partly there was a history of taking into account what people were at certain times, and thankfully we've evolved past that. Now, what you said before about Orthodox Jews wanting to go back to the sacrifice, unfortunately there are some, but I think if you took a poll in any, at least in the modern Orthodox synagogue, I think you would find well over 90% who do not want to go back to those sacrifices. And thankfully we have Rav Kook indicating, and again, based on Isaiah, if the wolf will dwell with the lamb, the lion will fill with the eye, no one will hurt nor destroy in all of God's holy mountain. So hopefully we've moved away from that. And
Dr. Schwartz, what they want is irrelevant. What they do is what they think God told them to do. They don't do what they want to do. By the way, there's also something called an affirmation bias or a confirmation bias. If you like eating meat and you want to keep eating meat, and your passage in the Torah that lead you to believe that you should eat meat, and some other ones that say that you shouldn't, you're going to go with the ones that say you should eat meat because that's what you want to do. That's what you want to believe. So we've got to liberate ourselves from that concept. Dr. Schwartz, it's been a pleasure having you with us. I really am such a great admirer of yours and your commitment, your dedication, your knowledge. Your books are incredible. I recommend that people buy your books, especially the one about Judaism and Who Stole My Religion, your modern ones now about veganism. I recommend that people latch on to Jewish Veg and be part of it and try to spread the word, spread the gospel. Dr. Schwartz, thank you very much for honoring L'Dor Va-Dor with your erudite exposition of the Torah and compassion and veganism. We're with you 100%. Thank you for being with us.
Okay, thank you very much. And I look forward to getting the link, and I'll share it very widely. And we certainly may not agree 100% in everything. We're certainly in complete agreement that we need a more vegan world, and we need to teach more about that Judaism has very strong teaching on compassion and sharing and justice and taking care of our health. So thanks, and best wishes for continued success in your other podcasts and other programs.
Kol tov l'cha. And also what we do at L'Dor Va-Dor, like you say, you don't agree with everything I say. That's a good thing. We like having diverse views and sharing views. That's the Jewish tradition. That's how we try to approximate truth. You've done a great job in helping us to try to achieve an understanding and the truth. Thank you so much. Keep up the good work. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you, Sharon, for making this possible. And I hope to see you on Friday night, where you can zoom into us even from Israel at ledorvador.org. You can see an incredible service, a Shabbat celebration that unites the greatest revelations of all, science and religion,